So this is for MBA 639 with Jim Mahar. The book that I read was Sway by Ori and Ram Brafman, and it was a good book. I liked it. I liked it better than the last book I read, which was Identity Economics. I think this one was easy to read too. So the book goes over a number of different cognitive biases, or what they call sways. So like subconscious things that kind of push investors, or anybody really, doesn't have to do with, you know, finances directly, but pushes individuals to make certain decisions that are actually irrational. So the subtitle is, the irresistible pull of irrational behavior. So a couple of the different ones they go over is loss aversion, commitment, diagnosis bias, and fairness, and then value attribution. So one of the things they start off the book with is this example of a pilot, Van Zenten, I think is his name. It's like a European. He was flying a plane with passengers, and he was forced to land on this island, Tenerife, I believe is what it's called. And he's a very reputable pilot, always on time. And so he's forced to land, which puts him behind schedule. It was poor weather, which is putting him behind schedule even more. He was told that he wasn't allowed to, all the planes had to land on this tiny island. They were told that they weren't allowed to fly because of the weather, so he started fueling up. Then they got clearance to that they could fly, but he had to finish his fueling up process, so he's becoming very aggravated, very frustrated. And this scheduling, he's coming, more and more behind, and then it becomes time where he has to decide, well, am I going to try to make this flight and take off, or am I going to have my passengers stay overnight? All the meanwhile, the passengers are staying on the plane. He's getting more and more frustrated. Then it comes time where he does have clearance. Like I said, he was fueling up and he got clearance to take off, but this fog rolled in. So he's communicating, asking for permission to take off, which they said you do. Then he was asking permission to go into the runway, which the control tower didn't give him. So where loss aversion and commitment apply is loss aversion. He had the decision, to stay and make himself, be recognized as, oh, your time's a little bit late. And so maybe the quality of a pilot might diminish a little bit, or like his reputation might diminish. But in this case, he ended up leaving, and they crashed another plane, and all the passengers died, which is about like 584 passengers, including himself. So he didn't recognize as that, being a potential problem and taking off in this poor conditions in this inadequate airport runway. So this is where loss aversion kicks in. So he didn't realize that he really was taking a large risk, because he just recognized that there's this big loss for him staying overnight. He's already running behind schedule. If he stays overnight, he's going to put more of his flights behind schedule, be more of a burden on himself and the company. So he didn't want that to happen. So he was just trying to avoid that loss. So he took the risk of taking off. So that's loss aversion. Commitment also applied to that example, the first example they had in the book. Commitment also applies because he was very committed to being on time, very committed to achieving this goal of taking off and not having the passengers stay overnight. He's always been on time, so it's kind of like his habit of being on time. So not being on time kind of creates this cognitive dissonance. I'm not usually late. I'm never late. This never happens to me. So it kind of pushes him, or as the book title, pull to the irrational behavior of taking off in really poor conditions that, as being an expert pilot, he should have known that he never should have taken off in. So where do loss aversion and commitment apply to the to investing, or the financial portion of this course? Well, if you think about loss aversion, it's also another example in the book. They use this investor who's working with a client, and a financial advisor is working with the client who's an investor, and the financial advisor tells the investor, your stock, your asset is not performing very well. I think that we should sell it. And the investor says, oh, I'll just wait until it gets back to the price that I bought it at, and then we'll sell it. And then a couple months go by, or however long it was. I don't remember exactly how long it was. I think it was about a month or two. Goes by, and the stock price drops further than where it was before. And then the investor's saying, okay, well, I just want to wait until it gets back to where it was. and then the price drops even more, and then the investor, oh, I just want to get back. So they're always thinking, once it gets up, once it just comes back to where it was, I'll sell it, because they're trying to avoid that loss. But then at the end of the day, the guy walked away with pennies to the dollar, because of where the value of the stock was when he was forced to sell it, or when it had no value at all. So by investors trying to avoid that loss, they're really digging themselves into a deeper hole, which is a quote from the book. Diagnosis bias kind of looks at, for example, they did a study it was at MIT, and the students there had a substitute teacher, and before the substitute teacher came in, they were told they were going to have a substitute teacher. They were given a bio about him. There was 2 differences to the bio. It was just one subject line that either had 1 or 2 things. Otherwise, the bio was the same from student to student. One said that the teacher was very warm, and the other one said that they were rather cold. And that was the only difference between the bio. So then the substitute taught the class. Then the students were given a questionnaire at the end, and it was identical. The students that read the bio said they were very warm, had positive thoughts about the professor, and gave him positive attributes, where the students that read the bio, which said he was rather cold, gave him negative attributes from the questionnaire. So even though the lecture was the same, they perceived it as differently based on the bio that they read. So all the students had the same professor. The way that they perceived the bio, or the way that they perceived the professor, was based off of that bio and whether it said very warm or rather cold, and everything else was the same. So simply based on that little bit of insight to the professor's values before they actually had the lecture given, they already had their mindset, and that's how they perceived it, was based off of the very warm or rather cold, and it changed their opinion of the overall lecture. So that's the diagnosis bias. It's kind of having that little bit of information beforehand and kind of already jump into a conclusion. That's very similar to another one, the last one that I'll discuss, value attribution. So this is interesting because I actually like classical music, and the study was done with this violin player who was a world-class violin player. He dressed up as your normal average Joe and played in the subway at Washington, D.C., and he played a 43-minute concert playing very difficult solo violin music, and the pedestrians, the passersby, just walked by, and he was dressed as a normal person, jeans, sweatshirt, baseball cap, where normally he would fill up these concerts that he had to pay a pretty premium dollar to get into. He'd fill up these concert halls and wearing his formal attire, that kind of thing, but he was dressed differently, so he looked like a normal street performer, and because of that, the people that walked by didn't really stop or didn't perceive it as being the highest of quality. Now, maybe they didn't recognize who he was, okay. Maybe they didn't have time to stop and watch, that's fine too, but there was about 2,000 people that walked by, and only 4 or 5 of them actually stopped to watch any length of time, and no one stopped to watch the entire thing when they were really getting this high quality, high world-class violin player for nothing. They didn't have to pay anything to see it. So it's just interesting that they were hearing, the highest of quality live violin music, but they were perceiving that it was just an average Joe playing the violin, just a normal street performer. So that's an example of value attribution, kind of not basing your perception of what's going on off objective data, but subjective characteristics. It's kind of like, if they would have closed their eyes and just listened to music, maybe they would have seen wow, this guy's really good. But, instead they just kind of heard music, saw a guy wearing a baseball cap and jeans, and thought, but what if he was wearing his tuxedo, or what if he was wearing his suit or his actual formal performance attire? It would have been a little bit different. So those are just some of the examples from the book. There's a lot more than the examples that I explained, but it is a great read, and I definitely enjoyed it.